This is part 2 of our reading of The Big Black Horse. Still following the black's hoof prints, he went on until he came to a small pool of fresh water. And there was the black beside it. The wild horse whistled and pawed furiously at the earth when he saw the boy, but made no move to harm him. So Alec, look out, Joe. Joe, look out. You want to read this book, Joe? Well, you can't. You're a dog. Go away. So Alec threw himself down on the ground, plunged his face into the cool, clear water, and drank until he had had enough. Then he fell into a deep sleep again. There's the black horse. And Alec drinking. He's really thirsty. You know, you can't drink salt water, can you? It's probably a spring that he's drinking from. When he awoke the next morning, he was terribly hungry. After all, he had gone a whole day and a half without eating. He must find some food, and he did. Not far from the spring was a berry bush, and he had to be satisfied with a meal of berries. Now, to make some sort of shelter for himself, he went to the beach, picked up some long pieces of driftwood, and dragged them back to the spring. With these, he built a small shed, or we might say a lean-to. All this work made him hungry again, but he was very tired and weak, so he lay down to rest. Nearby, he saw the black moving from one place to another, looking for small patches of grass. "He's as hungry as I am," thought Alec as he closed his eyes. The next morning, Alec made his way towards the rocky side of the island. There he found a lot of sea moss growing on the rocks at the water's edge. He remembered reading that some kinds of sea moss could be eaten and would keep a person alive. He pulled off whole handfuls of the moss and hurried back to the spring with it. There he washed it carefully in the fresh water to take away the salty flavor of the sea and set it out in the sun to dry. After a little while, Alec tasted it. It wasn't bad, and at least he would keep him from starving. He ate some more and left the rest on the ground beside the pool. Would the black eat it too? Alec hurried to his shelter and watched anxiously. Soon the horse rushed up, shook his head, and took a long drink of water. Next he put his nose to the ground and walked over toward the moss. He sniffed at it first, then tasted a little bit of it, and ate it all. That night Alec slept better than at any time since he had been on the island. He had found food for his horse and for himself. He's calling the black, and the black is running down to him. A little breezy out here. From that day on, the big black horse knew that Alec was his friend. He was still a very wild horse, but the boy was kind to him, so the black never snorted or kicked or showed his teeth when Alec came near him. Instead, he came when he was called and ate all the sea moss the boy brought him. At last, something even more wonderful happened. One day, the black let Alec climb upon his back and ride him all around the island. There's Alec. Alec climbed up on a tree to get on his horse. Never had Alec ridden such a wonderful horse. He was as swift as the wind. Every day after that, Alec rode the black up and down the beach. Sometimes the horse would rear when Alec tried to mount him, but the boy would speak softly in his ear, and then the black would quiet down. He's riding his horse there. Alec grew to love the black and to wonder how he would get him home. He wanted to keep him in a fine barn and take care of him. He wanted to ride him in the park and show him to his friends. But how would either of them ever get off this island? They had been on it for 19 days, and the weather was turning cold. That night, Alec put more wood on the fire. He had been able to start to keep him warm. He then crawled wearily into his shelter and was soon fast asleep. There's the horse, and he's in his little lean-to, and he's got his little fire going. I'm assuming he either had a flint or he used a wood drill. He didn't know how long he had been sleeping when the black's shrill scream awakened him. The top of the shed was on fire. Alec leaped to his feet and rushed outside. A strong wind was blowing, and instantly he saw what was happening. Sparks from his campfire had been blown upon the top of the shelter and had set fire to the dry wood. Uh-oh. Alec grabbed a turtle shell, filled it at the spring, and threw the water on the flames. He did it again and again, but the fire had too good a start, and soon the whole shelter and 2 nearby trees were blazing. You have to be very careful with fire, huh? The fire burned until early dawn. When it was over, Alec's shelter was gone. There was nothing for him to do but try and build a new one. The black trotted ahead of him as he went towards the beach to look for some wood. That's all that's left of Alec's shelter. And the black says, okay, we're going over here now. Oops. There we go. At the crest of a hill, Alec suddenly stopped. There below him was a ship anchored a few hundred yards off the island. There's a ship there. And they're looking out there saying, huh. Then he heard voices and saw a rowboat being drawn up on the beach by 5 men. "You were right, Pat. There is someone on this island," he heard one of the men shout, and the other said, "Sure, and I knew I saw the light of a big fire burning here last night." So you see, the fire was kind of lucky. Alec shouted for joy. "We're going home, Black," he yelled to his horse. "We're going home." There's Alec waving at the fisherman. Oops. Go away, Joe. The sailors couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Alec, for he was a strange sight. His red hair was long and tangled. His thin body, browned by the sun, was covered only with a few shreds of clothing. When Alec told the sailors how he'd been pulled through the stormy sea by a big black horse, they thought he must be imagining things. But when he called the black and the fiery horse came running down the hill to him, the sailors could no longer doubt his word. There's the black coming down to him. They stepped back in fear of the black and watched with wonder in their eyes. Alec patted and coaxed the big black horse toward them. Then Alec said, "You'll take him too, won't you? I can't leave him behind." "Oh, he's too wild. We couldn't take him. We couldn't handle him," came the captain's answer. "But I can handle him," Alec pleaded. The black was still, his head turned towards the ship as if he understood what was going on. "Please," Alec said, "he saved my life. I can't leave him here alone. He'll die." "But how are you going to get him out there?" the captain asked, pointing to the anchored ship. "He can swim," Alec answered eagerly. "He'll follow me. I know he will." The captain talked to his men about it and then said, "Okay, son, you win. Now let's see you get him to the ship." "Come on, Black," Alec said, standing up in the boat while the sailors began rowing slowly. "Come on, Black," he urged, raising his voice. "Swim, Black, swim." There's Alec in the boat. And the horse saying, uh-oh. The big horse pawed the sand. He reared up high in the air. He trusted Alec, but not the strange men in the boat. He ran up and down the beach, snorting and neighing. Alec kept calling him to come to the boat, moving further and further away from the beach. Suddenly, the black plunged into the water and began swimming, following the boy he loved. When they reached the big ship, the black was swimming close to the rowboat. "Good boy," Alec whispered proudly to him. There you can see he's looking up at his friend. There's the big ship. Lucky it's a calm day. The sailors went aboard and soon lowered a long chain that was used in lifting heavy boxes onto the ship. At the end of the chain hung a broad strap that had to be put around the black's stomach. How was he going to do this, Alec wondered. He took the strap in one hand and slid from the small boat into the water. Then he called softly, and the black swam towards him. What do you think he's going to do, huh? Underwater picture. When Alec was alongside his horse, he took a deep breath and sank below the surface. He swam under the water, trying to get beneath the black's stomach and come up on the other side of him. In that way, he could get the strap around his horse. But one of the black's hoofs struck him accidentally on the shoulder, and he had to rise to the surface. He waited until the pain left his shoulder, and then he tried again. This time he swam deeper, and when he came up on the other side of the black, he buckled the strap tight around his horse. Then he called to the sailors to start the engine that would raise the chain. Slowly, the black was lifted out of the water and high into the air. He thrashed his legs wildly in his fury, but at last he was safely on board the ship, and Alec was there to tell him everything was all right. There's Alec in the water, and the black getting hoisted onto the ship. The captain of the ship gave the black a fine big stall, and Alec spent almost every hour with his horse. He gave him good things to eat, oats and bran and hay. Every day, too, he gave him an apple, for he had found that the black loved apples just as much as he did. And Alec told him that within a few days, they would reach New York City, where his mother and father would meet the ship. The captain had sent them a message by radio, telling them that Alec was safe and on his way home. The message hadn't said, though, that he was bringing a horse home with him. Alec worried about this. What would his mother and father say when they saw the big horse? Would they let him keep them? He already thought of a place to stable the black. Down the street from where he lived on Long Island was an empty barn and a big field. "That'll be your home," he told the black, "and I'll take care of you." There's Alec and his horse. When the ship reached New York, Alec had his hands full getting the black down the gangplank. It was evening, and the crowds and bright lights of the pier frightened the big horse. Several times he reared high on his hind legs, and his great body was hot and wet with fear. These guys are going, uh-oh. And Alec's going, "Come on, Black, we're going to get the heck out of here." Alec removed his sweater and tied it over the black's eyes. He told him that he would be his eyes for a little while, and there was nothing to be afraid of. When the black's big body stopped trembling, Alec knew it was safe to take him down the gangplank. On the pier, Alec's mother and father were waiting for him. They all put their arms around one another and stayed that way a long time. After that, they turned to the black. "He's mine," Alec told them. They didn't say anything. They were afraid of the black. Alec told them not to be afraid, that the black was the most wonderful horse in the whole wide world, and he told him how the black had saved his life by pulling him through the terrible storm and onto the safe sandy beach. "I wouldn't be here now if it weren't for him. Please let me take him home. He's my horse forever and ever." Tears were in his parents' eyes when Alec finished his long story, but even though they were very grateful to this big black horse for saving Alec's life, they were still terribly afraid of him. "He's so big, Alec," they said, "so big and wild." Alec turned to his horse. Yes, the black was all they said, so big and wild. But how could he make them understand that if you loved him and were good to him, he would love you too and always be your friend? I don't think his parents were horse people. Hold on now. Suddenly, the black's large nostrils opened wide as he sniffed the air around him. Then he walked forward to Alec's mother and pushed his nose into her big coat pocket. It happened so quickly that Alec's mother didn't have a chance to get away from him. Before she knew it, the big black horse had the apple from her pocket. Ah, there he is getting the apple. She had bought it from a man on the pier, thinking Alec would like to eat it on the way home. Alec grinned and said, "He likes apples a lot, Mom, so now he's your friend too." His mother and father put their hands on the black's nose, patting him timidly. Alec watched them, knowing that everything had turned out all right and the black was going home. So the big black horse now lives in the old barn not far from Alec's house. Alec works hard taking care of him and doing jobs after school so he can buy feed and apples for his horse. But he's very happy, and so is the black. They're together, and that's the way they had hoped it would be. The end. So that's the story. And if you guys like this, what I'll do is read a couple other stories. But now I gotta go back to work. And there's Laddie over there. So take care.